Welcome to the Survivor to Thriver show with your happiness expert, Samia Bano. Do you feel stuck, silent, and stressed? Is something hurting your heart and soul? Are you burning yourself out? If so, you are in the right place because this is the podcast people from all over the world join in to learn exactly how to stop suffering and start living with inner peace and joy. Let's get started.
Hey, last episode we were talking about responding with empathy and compassion and how that is a much better, more effective way of helping us stop suffering and start living with inner peace and joy, right? Because what we focus on expands. When we are coming from a place of blame and judgment, we are focused on the problem, on what is negative, on what is not working in our lives, in the situation, whatever our situation is. And so when we focus on the problem and on everything that's wrong in a given situation, then the problem expands and our sense of what's wrong expands. And of course, when you're surrounded by problems, when your focus is on everything that's wrong, how are you supposed to feel good? Right? Also, think about it from another perspective of, especially if you're talking about the impact that blame and judgment can have on our relationships. Who likes being blamed? No one likes being blamed, and no one likes being judged. So it can also really poison our relationships. So it's important that we learn better ways of dealing with things and responding to our situations. And we talked about how compassion and empathy are much better ways. But when I talk about this with people, one of the questions I often get, and one of the concerns that often comes up for people is, it's like people connect judging and especially when we're talking about the concept of judgment, and I say, don't judge, don't come from a place of judgment. With blame, a lot of people sort of instinctively, intuitively understand that, okay, yeah, blaming is bad, and it doesn't feel good, and it just has a negative connotation. But when we're talking about judgment, it's not always so immediately clear that judging let's be quite honest with ourselves. In our society, in our dominant culture, we are all taught how to judge and how to be very judgmental, in fact. We're judging every day, all day long, judging every little big thing that happens in our lives. And it's, and in fact, many of us pride ourselves on our judgment, right, and our ability to judge, because when we think of, okay, I'm judging this or judging that, I'm thinking about it usually in terms of distinguishing, the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, good and bad. It's like, okay, in the court of law, you have a judge, and the judge passes judgments, and it's a position of great honor and responsibility, of course, but it's a position of great honor. And you're like, and it's a very necessary position. And it's like, we have to judge. If we don't judge, then we can't come to a fair conclusion. It is judging that allows us to get to the truth of the matter. So if I'm saying now, like, don't judge because judgment makes you unhappy, makes us unhappy, what about, this whole thing about distinguishing between right and wrong and figuring out the truth? Isn't that important? Doesn't that matter? And what happens, like, if I stop judging, if I stop, using my rational faculties, my logical faculties to judge things, and figure out, what's right, what's wrong. I mean, can't we get into all kinds of trouble if you don't judge? Because we are not, being able to then distinguish properly between right and wrong, truth and untruth, things like that. And if you're not judging, it's like, aren't you sort of like, for the people who have done wrong, or even in a situation when I have done wrong, am I not just like giving the person or myself when I've done wrong, am I not just like sort of letting myself off without consequences and without, how am I to hold myself accountable, or how am I to hold someone else accountable who has done me wrong? And if we don't hold people accountable, if we don't hold ourselves accountable, won't that create more problems? Well, yeah, of course. Of course it will. Of course it will. We need, look, it's a core essential human need that we also have, that there be justice, and that, we be in alignment. Like, we don't want to live a lie. We intuitively and instinctively value truth. And, even when it comes to our self-perception, there's, for example, this is a very common phenomenon in the context of human psychology. It's that, let's say you develop an image of yourself. We all have a self-image. There's a certain way in which we see ourselves. There's also, we all have a worldview. There's a certain way that we see the world, things that we believe are true and not true about how the world is and how the world works. And we like being in alignment with our sense of knowing, with the sense of what we know to be true. You see, and whenever there's a situation where, it seems like, oh, what I thought may not be true, it may not be the reality, we find that to be highly disturbing. And we will take all kinds of action, go to all kinds of length to get back to a place where we feel in alignment with our knowing, with our understanding of what the truth is. So for example, if you have a perception of yourself as somebody who is very courageous, and somebody calls you a coward, then you want to, Most of us, our reaction is, I'm going to show you I'm not a coward. And you may go to great lengths to prove that you're not a coward. So we all have an instinctive value for truth and living in alignment with our truths. And for and for that we need to be able to distinguish between truth and untruth and right and wrong. So that is not what I'm talking about. Like when I'm saying let's be non-judgmental, I'm not saying give up on this. But what I am saying is, look, when we are being judgmental, usually what's happening is that, at least in the context of how our dominant culture teaches us and trains us, when we're being judgmental, we tend to be stuck in a worldview and look at things in a way where everything is very like black and white. Things are right or things are wrong. Good or they're bad. And of course, like if you judge something to be bad, if you judge something to be wrong, you're not going to be able to respond positively to it. You're not going to be able to feel good about it. But the problem with this attitude and this way of seeing things is that the reality of our lives is that the world is not just black and white. Our lives are not just black and white. There are lots of shades of gray. There isn't just one perspective on any situation. There are multiple perspectives. And each perspective in its own way is accurate and valid. And when we make our black and white judgments about right and wrong, good and bad, usually we are only looking at things from a certain perspective. And the things that we are judging to be wrong or bad are other perspectives that we have not even examined. But if we were to examine those other perspectives, we would recognize the validity of those perspectives as well as the validity of our perspective. You see? And so that is what we're talking about when we're talking about practicing empathy and compassion. We are not saying shut down your own faculties and don't pay attention to right, wrong, good, bad. But what we are saying is you need to open your mind. Like before you arrive at a judgment and you decide good, bad, right, wrong, like make sure that you take some time, make some effort to broaden your perspective. Don't just look at things from your point of view. Step into the other person's shoes and look at things the way they are looking at things. And then from this place of broader perspective, a bigger picture perspective, you can arrive at more thoughtful decisions, more thoughtful conclusions, more wise decisions, more wise conclusions, more compassionate conclusions, and better solutions, like more win-win solutions. So it doesn't have to be you against me and us versus them, but it's like we can we can find the common ground between your perspective and my perspective, right? Find those places of intersection in our views and in our goals and in our needs and values, and come up with win-win solutions. So, just so, it's easier for us to communicate about this idea, let's, sometimes they say, okay, let's use different words. So it's like we'll say, use the word judgment to represent the way of thinking that's like, culturally dominant, and, that where the judgments are also very much like tied in with blame and cause the fighting and cause the us versus them phenomenon to emerge. Let's call that way of doing things judgment, because that's, the normal operating procedure, and judgment is like, that's the normal context in which people are applying judgment. And let's use a different word to describe this alternative way of engaging, where, we are practicing greater empathy, greater compassion. And the suggestion by Marshall Rosenberg, I've talked to you about Marshall Rosenberg before, right? In previous episodes. He's the father of nonviolent communication. For a lot of people, the term nonviolent is it doesn't make sense. They don't understand it, and it is like I think it's like a technical term. Like, it has a very specific definition and way in which the community, who is all into nonviolent communication, nonviolent action, they use it, they understand it in a very particular way that's not necessarily intuitive for most people. So, the other way we can describe this approach to communication and being and living is compassionate. Compassionate communication, compassionate living. So Marshall Rosenberg suggests that this alternative way of doing things, where we're practicing greater empathy and compassion, let's call that evaluation, right? So it's like when I come across a situation, I don't just jump straight into a judgment. I take time and effort to evaluate what's going on. And implicit in that idea of evaluation is, okay, I'm going to look at all the facts and figures of the situation, and not just like from my perspective, but from the other person's perspective as well. Just, get a more holistic picture, gather all the data that I can, and then I'm going to evaluate it, you see? And then I'm going to reach a conclusion based on that evaluation. And I'm going to reach a conclusion only after I have gone through this process of evaluation. Rather than with judgment, in the judgmental way of doing things, we oftentimes don't take time to consider alternatives and additional data. We just kind of jump straight to the conclusion, right? So, if you're going to commit to your inner peace and joy, if you're going to, commit to this more empathetic, compassionate way of living, you need to commit to evaluating, rather than judging. And it will take more effort. It can take more time. And for most of us, we really need to work on building a new habit so that we are not automatically going into judgment mode, but rather we are taking putting in the time and effort required to do good evaluations. So it's going to require us to develop a whole new way of being and thinking and new habits. So it's going to take effort. So this is not just something that's just going to happen. It's like you have to commit to it. You have to stay focused on this as a goal, and like really work on it in your life. Like really practice and perfect it through practice. So it's up to you. It's up to you. Are you ready to commit to evaluating, to doing things in a more empathetic and compassionate way, so that, if for no other reason, so that you can stop suffering and live with more inner peace and joy. And it'll also have the excellent side effect of improving not only your relationship with yourself, because you're going to practice it relative to yourself, but it's also going to improve all your other relationships, because you're going to practice it in all of your relationships with other people as well, right? So it's like, are you ready to commit? If you're ready to commit, and this is something that you find yourself struggling with, please don't struggle with it on your own. Reach out for some help and support. And I'm one person that you can reach out to help and support for. And you know how to reach me. Just go on my website at www.academyofthriving.com. Click on the Contact Us page, and you'll see all the different options for how you can connect with me, including social media, email, and phone. So I look forward to hearing from you, and until we connect next time, I wish you lots of peace and joy.